The story starts with Toya going to the king's palace, where the king has been poisoned. He immediately meets a count who acts and looks so evil that the audience instantly knows he did it. The count blames the Beast Girl from the start of episode 3, but she obviously didn't do it because she's a cute girl. Toya cures the king, and then gets to investigating. The count claims the Beast Girl, an ambassador, poisoned the wine that she brought to the king as a gift, but Toya uses his search spell to identify that, in fact, the wine was not poisoned, the glass was. He forces the count to drink from the glass, causing him to panic, fearing his death, only for Toya to reveal that the poison had already been cleaned out of the cup. The count's reaction, therefore, proves he knew about the poisoned cup. Everyone celebrates what happened, and one person here seems to be especially excited about Toya's feats of heroism: Princess Yumina. She declares that she wants Toya to be her betrothed, and her parents seem to be wholly in support of this, because Yumina has eyes that can determine a person's true nature, so Toya must be a good, worthy man. Problem being that Toya is 16, and Yumina is 12. Yeah, we're only about halfway through the episode, but we need to stop and talk about this. First off, this is weird. From a genre-savvy point of view, we have identified Yumina as a member of the narrative harem for our character, one of the many branches of a sprawling love triangle centered around our protagonist. She is, in so many words, a love interest. But not only that, she is a love interest within a story that is based on wish fulfillment from the perspective of the male lead. So this, on its face, is very creepy and not fun, but if we take a step back and stop making assumptions about the story's intentions, however realistic, then there's some interesting analysis to be had, because from a structural point of view, this love interest is the best set up romantic subplot within the story so far. I actually have a lot of good things to say about the whodunit plot. Well, the answer of who did it was obvious. The answer of how he did it was pretty interesting, if cliché, without there needing to be too many details established. And, moreover, the way Toya got the man to incriminate himself was genuinely clever and engaging to watch. I wouldn't be surprised if it was stolen from somewhere, but it was fairly well executed. But moreover, this is a good example of how to handle a power fantasy, because this here isn't actually the dramatic conflict of the episode. The dramatic conflict is what happens when Yumina declares her intentions to marry Toya. Toya's heroism was a setup to the actual problem he'd then face, one that he can't solve with null magic: a social conflict. The scene with Yumina trying to talk everyone into letting her marry Toya is genuinely kinda well written. Toya is against it because of Yumina's age, and he keeps trying to give reasons why it's a bad idea, but Yumina keeps giving counter reasons which her parents eat up, ending on the king and queen imploring Toya to get to know Yumina and then see if he wants to marry her when he's 18, because earlier he said his culture forbids men from marrying until that age as an excuse to get out of this. Little moments like Toya going, "She's too young," and then the king and queen saying they got married at that age and only wish that they got married sooner, is darkly comedic in a way that also adds to the narrative tension. It's engaging, and it ends with her sticking around Toya as a new member of the party, which is both a very natural way for it to resolve, and also the way which is the most narratively interesting, in addition to actually giving Toya something of a loss on his record. This was well thought out. Not only that, but this whole thing is the best characterization Toya has gotten. Like I said in episode 1, Toya's characterization is somewhat at the whims of the narrative. He just goes along with whatever, but here he is fighting against that for the first time, establishing boundaries and arguing for something. Additionally, the entire setup has him engaging in that heroic archetype of the cheeky smart guy that he has sometimes slipped into during combat sequences, but here he's like that the whole time, like when he uses the slip spell to mess with the count even before he knew he was the culprit. Not to mention the setting of the whodunit is somewhat engaging on its own, as it forces Toya into a new environment after he has already properly developed his skills and powers. He arrives at the king's court, brought along by the duke. He goes and heals the king, and in the eyes of all the people here, Toya is now a significant person within their political world from this point onward. He gets a presence within the cast of this side story, and it is this presence that makes the romantic subplot feel more human.
He's intelligent, and he lives to bring happiness to those around him.
Yumina recognizes Toya for his heroism and his intelligence, things which this arc genuinely characterized him as having. For this arc, he felt like he stood out somewhat, and the very traits that make him stand out are the things that make Yumina so enraptured with him. You can empathize with her. This is one of the few times where a girl instantly falling for the protagonist of an isekai feels slightly earned. For a moment, Toya is a character we want to root for, want to see more of, and here is a character who wholly agrees with us, who sees in him what we see, and with Jessie Grelly and Felicia Angel handling the characters really well in the dub, it's almost charming. You almost want to root for her, but then you remember one little fact about her and Now, this subject matter isn't, impossible to handle. We could very easily have a story where a girl falls for a boy who's a bit too old for her, but she uses him as an inspiration to grow as a person, right? There are paths you can go down. So long as this show doesn't sexualize this prepubescent girl and doesn't fetishize her for her age, I'm sure she'll make a wonderful addition to the cast. Yeah, that's not happening! After getting betrothed, Toya rests in a bedroom and has a call with God, who teases Toya about his situation and makes a joke about him going to hell if he handles it wrong. Ha ha ha! Normal show! And then the God mentions polyamory is a thing in this setting. You know, world building. Yumina joins the gang and instantly becomes way less interesting. She has no drives other than being around Toya, more or less, so she becomes about as cookie-cutter as the others. She was assertive and narratively provocative before this, but not anymore. She's just more kindling for the pyre at this point. They hunt some monsters together. Would have fit her character if she went out and did something that involved directly helping people like Toya did for her, but whatever, I'm the only one who cares about this. And then we get some ship tease for a potential harem ending. End of episode. Alright, let's talk a little bit about polyamory, shall we? Polyamory isn't really one thing. It can be a polycule where 3 or more people are all romantically involved with one another. It could be a web of one-on-one relationships where no one is exclusive to one another, and it can be anything in between. It's basically just the absence of monogamy. One way in which polyamory can manifest is through one-sided monogamy, also known as a harem situation, in which one individual has multiple partners, none of which have other partners of their own. This is a perfectly valid way to live one's life if everyone involved enjoys the arrangement, but it is also a very common sexual fantasy, as well as a common masculine ideal. It is its own kind of power fantasy, not just a sexual fantasy for pornographic means, nor a romantic fantasy in which a love triangle is resolved in a way where everyone wins, but rather the very idea of having one's own harem makes some people feel big. But you know, wish fulfillment and fantasies aren't inherently toxic. Escapism is fine in its own context, but there are pitfalls that I'm sure many of you are already identifying within this show, one of which is objectification. So there have been a number of manga out there which have, as a premise, the idea of a romance between an idol and their fan, but the only one I've come to like is something called Dame Doll. It's about an idol with exactly one fan, and the premise is something of a slow burn romance, but what's nice about it, compared to the vast majority of romance manga being released right now, is that its subject matter is handled with respect. The story does contain within it a premise many find desirable and wish-fulfilling, but that point is never forced within the story. There aren't these moments where the girl acts unrealistically flustered and drooly over the guy for no reason. It's not pandering, and the guy isn't a strict self-insert. He is his own character, and oftentimes it can feel easier to project onto the girl than the guy. It is a story that enables wish fulfillment, but which does not use wish fulfillment as its base. It takes its subject matter seriously as more than merely a subject of fetishization. It treats it like a love story. In Smartphone Isekai, though, it's a different story. The idea of polyamory here isn't introduced to explore how interesting the idea is, or because there are just so many compelling love interests that it feels wrong for him to only pick one. These other girls barely feel like love interests. Instead, there is this odd narrative pressure. The author is merely nudging the reader and winking at him in this really obnoxious and uncomfortable way. Hey, lots of cute girls here. Would be funny if Toya just married them all. JK. Unless. Hey, by the way, did you know this girl is 12? Here's a joke about her giving birth. From this moment on, every romantic moment that these characters have will take on the air of an excuse. The author isn't building a compelling love story here, just a series of excuses for the harem ending to eventually feel like it didn't come out of nowhere, for Toya to get all the girls for the sake of getting all the girls. Not for who those girls are or the bonds he shares with them, they are merely objects in the grand plan of having a harem ending. It's degrading and it's narratively disappointing. None of the romance could possibly hit hard and make me feel for it from this point on unless they do something really groundbreaking and emotional. Anyways, the next episode has Toya being a sex pest. Woo! If you want to keep watching me lose my mind at this show, then like and subscribe with notifications on. Leave a comment telling me what you thought of the episode, and if you like what I do and want me to do more, you can subscribe to my Patreon. I'm currently working on a long-form video on Darling in the Franxx and releasing it in parts for all of my patrons. And as always, a big warm thank you to my second-tier patrons, Bellman and Carolyn Vig. And of course, my one-tier patron. I've only got one so far, but working on that. Love you guys too, or love you guy too. Girl too? Thanks for supporting.